Reed Diamond is our guest today on the show. I'm so excited. I have been really just going through your filmography recently and just making sure I check all the boxes because you have been a part of so many projects. Thank you for your time. It's great to meet you and chat with you
Oh,
today.
Brett, it's awesome to be here, man. I've been looking forward to it.
Well, I'm excited. We're going to go in as much of order as I can, but I was
Great.
looking at this here, and you, of course, did Designated Survivor with
Right.
um Kiefer,
Keep,
and then you did 24 with him previously. So I have to just ask before I forget, when Designated Survivor came along, was that an automatic offer from him to be a part of that project because you had worked together before?
well, that's interesting. I remember, I mean, yeah, I had a great time working with him on 24. And then I remember when I heard about Designated Survivor, probably when they were getting ready to do the pilot, and I heard the log line on it, and I go, oh, I want to be on this show. But I don't know,
Okay.
yeah, because it was just such a what a cool concept that a guy who's not ever planning on being president and isn't necessarily qualified to be president gets to be president. And also, you've got this horrible event that causes that situation to occur. But I don't know if I don't think Kiefer invited me. I think it was Dave Guggenheim, the
Okay.
creator, showrunner. But yeah, they did offer me, I think when I can't remember when I came in, like sixth episode. I came in somewhere at the beginning of the first season. And it was funny because so many things are top secret on television. And I remember getting that first scene. I think it was me and Maggie Hugh in that first scene where I'm Director Forrestal, somewhere in the FBI, and he was just sort of enigmatic and probably a bad guy. And then they just kept inviting me back for more. And in fact, I had some friends who went to I think like a memorial service for somebody with, and Kiefer was there, and they're like, oh, we're friends with Reed Diamond, and Kiefer's like, oh, he's coming back for more. There's going to be a lot more to do, and I was really excited about it because it was a great cast, and I really liked the scripts, and I loved the character. But it was funny because I went to the creator and I said, "Hey," because they sometimes they like to keep things top secret. They don't tell you. I go, "Am I a good guy or a bad guy?" And he goes, and he goes, and he goes, "Well, you seem like a bad guy, so you're probably a good guy." And I end up becoming a good guy. But it's funny because nowadays I've been lucky recently where I've gotten the whole script before I start, and I kind of know where we're going, so I know if I'm a bad guy or a good guy. But oftentimes I play that character where I'm either the good guy who thinks the bad guy or the bad guy who you think is the good guy. And also, the top secret aspect of it is always very funny. I just came back from doing Law and Order, Organized Crime. And I guess I can't really say anything about the character, but I was like, I think he's a bad guy. But
Yeah, it's
yeah,
interesting
yeah,
oftentimes, particularly because you don't know, and
right.
they tease it out to the point where they have you rooting for the character, regardless of whether they're good or bad. It's just, I think it comes down to writing, right? As far as
Yeah,
how the story is written. That's very cool that you're doing that. We love the Dick Wolf universe over
heck
here.
yeah, yeah.
So I'll be interested to see how that storyline plays out for you. Now, I'm going through this here, and you've done so many different things, but winding the clock back,
Yeah,
Homicide, Life
yeah.
on the Street, was that really like your big break into the business? Because you had done other things before that, but was that really what launched you? I mean, you did all the seasons pretty much, almost 70 episodes.
Yeah, so Homicide was one of the greatest, probably the greatest job of my career. It was a really important and special experience. And but you asked that great question, like, was that my big break? I feel like I've had like nine big breaks, right?
Okay.
Because that's kind of what it's like, as you said, I have a long resume. It's because I've been in the business a long time. It's almost been 40 years. When I started
Wow.
at 17 years old, I joined SAG in 1985. And I've earned my living as actor since I was 17. So, I mean, because my first movie was this movie called Memphis Belle, which we did and came out in 1990. But my first, yeah, I mean, Homicide was huge for me, and it was sort of it was a few years in the making because I remember I was sitting in a hotel room in Vancouver shooting a pilot for another show for NBC when the first episode of Homicide aired on television. And I just
Wow.
remember, and I remember sitting in my hotel room shooting this other pilot and watching that first episode. And I go, I be on this show. I have to be on this show. And it even goes back a little bit further because I started in New York. I grew up in New York. I went to theater school in New York. I started my acting career. In fact, one of my first jobs was on the original Law and Order, the first, the original iteration of Law and Order, season 2. And then at the time in 1991, 92, when I did that show, it was the only TV show in New York City. So after I finished shooting that, I moved out to Los Angeles, and shortly after getting to Los Angeles, I had some sort of first of probably many existential crises. And I go, what am I doing? Maybe acting. I don't know. Is that a real job? I should do something real. And I go, I think I'm going to become a cop. And I befriended, there's a bunch of LAPD guys who do smaller parts or even background work in shows in LA. And I befriended one, and he's like, hey, I'll take you to the police academy and he'll take you on a ride along. And then the hilarious part was all the cops I met, they all wanted to become actors, and which of course, right? And I realized this is what I was born to do. It's what I love to do. So hopefully one day a show will come along where I can play a cop realistically. And Homicide was that gift. So I remember. So now cut to 3 years later from doing that pilot and sitting in my Vancouver hotel room, I get an audition for Homicide: Life on the Street. For this part, and I just remember it was a brilliant scene. It was one scene, and I go, "Oh gosh, if they want a guy like me who looks like me, I'm going to get this." But at the time, and I think this was even in the breakdown of the character in the early '90s, everything that I went up for, the breakdowns, if you don't know, is a sort of description of the character, aged, what type of person they are, maybe some aspects of the character and what goes on in the show, and almost everything I auditioned for in the early '90s, it said a Johnny Depp type.
Interesting.
And right, because he was the thing. So that's what they were going for on TV. So everything I auditioned for was a Johnny Depp type. And I was sort of the opposite in many ways of a Johnny Depp type. I was blonde, blue-eyed guy. I seemed like I was from the Midwest, even though I'd grown up in New York City. And I go, if they want a guy who looks like me, I'm going to get this part. And I remember going to NBC in Burbank. There was a casting building off on that campus there, and everyone was there. But I was like, I was like, this is my part. I've been preparing for this for 3 years, trying to play this cop. And luckily it happened. And Tom Fontana and Barry Levinson decided to let me join the show. And Mike Kellerman was a gift, one of the greatest characters I've ever had the good fortune to play. And ironically, or coincidentally, I guess, I work with all these people all the time. So the last episode I just shot of this Law and Order Organized Crime, it was directed by Jean de Saugonzac, who was our DP on Homicide. And what made Homicide unique at the time, especially as a network show, because basic cable really hadn't happened yet and HBO was just starting to make programming, he shot the whole show handheld, 16 millimeter camera, pre-video, and which gave that show Homicide that look that many people have tried to copy since. And but it was a young Jean de Saugonzac holding a 16 millimeter camera on his shoulders. So, and he had the second hardest job, because the hardest job was Boots, who actually was the focus puller on our show. Because the beauty of Homicide, and I remember Tom articulating this. He said, because in real life, cops, he goes, he wanted to create a situation where the actors could stand still, where the characters could stand still, and the camera would create the movement. And because often there's always that joke or funny part of Law and Order, which I always love, of the original Law and Order, when the cops are interviewing someone, that person never stops the task that they're doing.
No, they're always unloading a truck
exactly,
or
right.
washing dishes. That's like become like a pop culture meme and GIF.
It's a pop culture meme. Because of course you're going to carry on stacking your boxes when a homicide detective is interviewing you about the death of someone. so Tom fixed that. But Boots, the focus puller, they never knew where Jean was going to point the camera per se. So he'd have to know how to get everyone in focus. And my hat's off to Boots, the focus puller on Homicide. So yeah, that was one of my first really big breaks.
Yeah, that was such a great show. Interestingly enough, surprisingly not one that they've tried to reboot or bring back to another network, which I think, depending on how it goes, it can be really good. But it's also one of those treasure troves of a show where it still has legs today. Recently just rewatching
Right.
episodes before our
Yeah.
conversation because it was a really good show. I think very smartly written.
It was an extraordinary show, and I think what you have to put it into its historical context too, which is now that we're in this other golden age that they call of television. What was what you have to realize is that was a network television show, right? And that was still
Yeah.
the time where really the networks at that time, Fox was just sort of really beginning with the X-Files, and that was their claim to fame. But you were trying to make cutting edge dramas or comedies on network. And I feel like for me, I always feel like the last time they did that was sort of The West Wing, because once basic cable opened up and you had Netflixes and you had even TNTs and AMC's and of course HBO, it really suddenly that was a place to go do that type of drama. And obviously, I always look at The Wire because The Wire is my favorite television
Mm.
show, I think, of all time. And that was created by David Simon, who wrote the book Homicide that our show was based on. And he was a writer on the show. And now you got to, I look at that show jealously because, we had to create a realistic cop show without cursing. Right. And any sort of, gratuitous violence or nudity. So that was always the challenge of, how many times can you say son of a bitch? Right. But yeah, Homicide was a special show. And also, I think it's difficult sometimes, if you're younger, to remember at that time in the 90s, there was film and there was television, right? So people who acted in film weren't going to lower themselves and do television, but this was something else. So you had these incredible writers who wrote the show, and then we'd get all these incredible directors to come in, and oftentimes they'd be someone who directed an independent film. They weren't television directors per se. And then you would have all these amazing guest stars. You got movie stars to come. Robin Williams wants to be there. Everyone wants. I mean, if you just look at the list of guest stars, I mean, so we were making something very special for time, and I knew it then, and I feel honored that I got to be part of it. But now the only reason it's not syndicated, and you probably know this, is just that the use of music. They couldn't afford to put it out again because they put in such incredible music that
Yeah.
really brought the show alive, right? And they can't pay for those songs right now. So I heard some rumor, David Simon said something online that maybe there were in negotiations because it would be great. I mean, I've always owned the DVDs because it's just a wonderful
I have the
catalog.
DVDs. I
You
mean,
do,
that
yeah.
was a
Okay,
great
yeah.
show. Yeah. You're tongue in cheek about the gratuitous, sex, and the
Right,
Shield came along and took care of that.
right.
Yeah.
And the Shield was a special thing because that's the beginning of FX, right? That was sort
Yeah.
of their flagship show. I remember they were very excited about this new network because I was in the pilot, right, of the Shield, and we're sitting there at the read-throughs, and all the heads of FX were there, and this was their hope that they were going to make these cutting-edge dramas, and turned out pretty well for them.
Yeah, I would say so for sure. I mean, that
Yeah,
was another really fun show. Well, I mean, you've had such a good career, and you mentioned that you've worked with these people over and over again. And I think it just goes to show you it's important to be kind in this business because you never know who you're going to wind up working with at some point. Whether it's David Guggenheim or whoever you've mentioned in this
yeah,
conversation,
yeah.
like they're bound to show up again at some point, right? I mean, you just have to keep that in mind.
Well, it's a funny thing, because first of all, I mean, you're either a good person or you're not a good person,
Right.
and because, but you're right. From just a purely mercenary point of view, I've always been surprised. I've worked with some pretty hilarious. They're always the bad stories always make the best stories, and I've worked with some hilariously awful people as human beings at times. They're the slim minority, but they exist out there. But I always go like, why are you yelling at that guy? Like, do you have no idea how this business works? Right? Exactly. The guy who brought you your coffee that morning could be running the studio in a couple of years. So it is just from a purely For a purely cynical Machiavellian way, you're really that's a poor strategy. But you can't fix evil, I guess, or
Right. No,
cruel.
no, it's interesting. It's always like they say, don't meet your heroes. But then when you do, you're like, wow, this is a very kind person. And
Hmm.
you just have no idea you watch them in other interviews sometimes, like
Right.
for
Yeah.
myself, or you hear them have conversations in passing with different journalists, and you just think to yourself, what is this going to be like? And then it turns out to be a really positive experience. So for you at this stage of the game,
Yeah.
having done so many projects, whether it's, Sony, Marvel, or whether it's, Clear and Present Danger, I mean, just the list goes on and on. What are a couple things that are important to you as a storyteller at this stage for you that make you choose and decide perhaps what you want to work on?
Oh, that's a great question because that's also
Thank you.
really changed. Yes, yeah, no, it's a great question because I remember when I first started out in the business because it's gone through many iterations in the time that I've been in the decades that I've been through it. And I remember when I first started, actors would say the only power you have as an actor is to say no, right? And so what you choose not to do, that's important. And I remember when I was sort of a young actor and trying, and as a young person, especially in your 20s, not only you're trying on personalities and you're trying to find exactly who you truly are. I mean, I'm always envious of when you meet someone very young who's just got such a clear sense of who they are and are comfortable being that person. But I remember when in the 90s, I'd say no. And I'd say no to things because I thought, oh, I'm crafting this career. And I just remember at some point, I thought, I don't know, I'm just going to say yes to everything. And that ended up being, it's probably when I had sort of, I guess in the late 90s, I'd finished Homicide and I was bouncing around from TV movie to TV movie and doing guest spots here and there. And I was sort of lost. It was when I'd get a part, it'd come the next day, and I wouldn't feel like I had enough time to prepare. And at the same time, I'd finally found my friend group in Los Angeles because it takes a long time to find people who you bond with and share
Okay.
the values with. And this group that I found and fell in love with, they were all improvisers, comedic improvisers from Chicago, and it was just very random the way we all connected, and they were just the most wonderful. And you know most of them now. I mean, they're all just incredibly talented, but incredibly good people. And when I'd started in high school, really acting, my best friend and I, we'd done improv forever. We'd do comedic improv and sketch stuff for our school and assemblies and things like that. And comedy was my first love, but basically I just sort of notched into doing dramas and I became the drama guy. And once you sort of find a lane, that's especially if you're getting offered stuff, it's you sort of stay in that lane. But I befriended all these guys and I would go to all their shows. And I thought, I want to get back into this. So I started doing shows in Hollywood at the Improv Olympic. And it was the greatest experience. It's in the late 90s, early 2000s. This was the greatest sort of I needed it. The sort of remedy for whatever was ailing me in my career, because the essence of improv is you can take one word or a sentence and you can create a whole 45-minute show out of that. And then
Yeah.
also and really you're saying, and then the key is yes and, right? It's just you agree and you further that on. And it really opened up my work because I was getting a little too I probably had too many acting classes. I was getting way too into my head on these shows, and there was no time to prepare, right? And I'd worked with one of arguably like the biggest acting coach in LA for years, and he goes, "Yeah, you need to know all of this," and I go, "I don't have time to, create this whole backstory. I just got the part yesterday, and I have to be on set tomorrow morning, and now I'm just in my head, right? I'm totally in my head, going, oh, I don't know what I had, what I ate for lunch when I was 5 years old. I can't play this part." And then improv reminded me, no, it's a kid's game. This is what you do. It's a kid's game played at an adult level. Brett, if you and I are playing in the park when we're 7 years old and you go, hey, you're the King of England and I'm the prince. And I go, well, so, I'm sorry, King of England, I'm going to have to go research what I would wear. And
Let me
you
pull
just
out
go,
my Encyclopedia Britannica and figure.
exactly right. You just go, yes, yes, and yes, I am the King of England, and you are my subjects, and go over here. So it returned me back to the joy of what brought me into this, and also took all of the intellectualism out of it. It also took all the preciousness out of it, because what I look for when I'm working now is I don't come with a plan of what I'm going to do. I prepare as much as I can or not. And then you and I are in the scene together. And I always say like 1 + 1 = infinity. So me playing off of you and you playing off of me, and we're going to create something that we never could have conceived of. And it's going to be much better than anything we could have planned. And also the mistake is the scene. Right. So if things go a little wobbly or we go somewhere, down a corridor we hadn't planned on, that might be the scene and that might be more fun to play. So it brought back that sense of joy and that sense of play. And I've been thinking about this a lot recently because we call ourselves actors now, but we were called players forever, right? That's Shakespeare's players and the list of players and the players. And I like play more than act because act means you have to do something, right? It's the verb to do, right? But play is it's because that's all we're doing. We're playing a kid's game. And so you asked this is my incredibly long-winded answer to your
No, I
question
love
of
it. I
like
think it's great.
is just that I started saying yes because right after I started doing all the improv, and so any job that would come along, yes, absolutely, and I've had more positive and fulfilling experiences as opposed because I thought I had some control, right? And it's that John Lennon thing, or life's what happens while you're making other plans, right? Or how do you make God laugh? Make a plan, right? So it's just, it's nice to have an idea of where you want to head, but it's so much better when you just throw your hat over the wall and say, yeah, I'm up for whatever comes my way. And so many more, I've had so many more interesting experiences and places I never thought I'd end up have happened that way. I mean, on so many shows, you just mentioned 24 and Designated Survivor are both perfect examples. I think on 24, I showed up. I think they planned on having me for 1 episode, right? And then suddenly something happened, and then I'm there. I become the bad guy for the rest of the season. That wasn't a
Yeah, that
plan.
was such a great character too. I mean,
Yeah,
man.
and the same thing with Designated Survivor. I think I was probably brought in for an episode or two, and then suddenly they like what I'm doing, and that gives them ideas, and they go off and write it. And so it became 19 episodes when it probably would have been two. And that's the miracle. You never really know. And your life can change in overnight, right? An experience that you never saw coming and you never could have seen coming. And so it's a great, it's an incredible career. My wife's an incredible actor as well, and we talk about this often. You have these moments of financial concern when you don't know. I just started this year. You go, I don't have any jobs lined up yet, and
And
then
then
one
you're
comes.
coming off a strike, which doesn't help.
Yeah, and then it shows up, right? And it always works out. I mean, I've been so fortunate to be a working actor since I was 17. I've always worked and it will always come, but you don't know when and you don't know what, and you don't know what it'll turn into. I mean, I can't tell you how many things that you're also on where you go, this is going to be it. This is going to be the biggest show ever. Or you're doing a movie, we're all going to win Academy Awards, and nothing happens with it. So if you could plan it, if it was just a mathematical equation, then someone would have figured it out a long time ago. And you never know what's going to hit,
Yeah,
right?
you don't. That's the crazy thing about your
Yeah.
world. I was just talking to Steven Weber, who,
Oh, I love Steven. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
we've had him a few times, and he's now on Chicago Med, but
Right,
he started out as just like this villainous character that was only supposed to last a few episodes, and now he's a permanent fixture on the show. I
right.
want to, and my point to all
Yeah.
that is you just don't know. So I want to ask you, going back to the beginning here as we kind of come to
Hmm.
the end of this chat, you talked about 24, you wind up becoming the main character for the rest of the season. How do you even prepare for that when you're only thinking you're going to be there for just a little bit, but now you're coming back more and more? Do you rely heavily on the writers for a show like that to kind of help shape your character? So, because you don't really know how long you're going to be there, and now you're there for a long time.
I find that tends to happen more often when you're doing network shows where they haven't fully written them out and they don't
Okay.
know per
Okay.
se where they're going. So because now when I'm doing more of a Netflix show or whatever that may be, AMC show, they've got a plan. They've got a sort of overarching plan because it's easier to think about 10 episodes than it is to think about 22, right? Because traditional network television, we're doing 22. I mean, it was even hilarious on 24. I thought, like, the show's called 24. You know how many episodes, you know each one's going to be an hour of the day. You must have a plan. And they'd gone through their plan already by hour 16 or whenever it was. So now they had to come up with a new plan. And that's fun. I mean, it's challenging as an actor when they don't know. So you sort of,
They're like, we don't know
right?
what we're gonna do.
It's challenging. So you play it as I've perfected with those characters on those types of shows, staying enigmatic
Okay.
and playing into sort of my strengths of, like, he could be a bad guy, but he could be a good guy. We'll see. It's obviously it's a little easier when you're on a show where you really know where you fit in. Uh, but so yeah, and now been doing it a long time. So you also sort of realize what flavor you bring to the stew or what instrument you are in the orchestra. And so if it's not very clear, I'm going to play my strongest instrument, my strongest suit, my most spicy flavor. I'm going to bring that because I know that's what they want. And I know it's fun because also if whatever gets me going usually will be what's right for those characters. And also now I play. Uh, well, I used to say, like, I play the guy you love to hate, or the but or
Yes.
the lovable asshole. And since when my hair went gray, then suddenly I was playing bad guys because you go through all these different. A career is made up of all these different archetypes that you play. So when I first started, I was always the boyfriend. I was the smoochy smooch, and I remember going to a manager I had at the time, who luckily now I'm not with, and I said, I don't want to do smoochy smooch anymore. I want to play a cop. She's like, you're gonna do a lot more smoochy smooch. No one's gonna give you a gun. And then luckily I get Homicide, and then you play cops for a while. So then I get offered cops, and that transforms into maybe or mutates into FBI agents. And then you play lawyers, and then maybe you show them something, you audition and get something else. And now, as soon as I got a little older, I was just playing some pretty evil white guys, which is really fun. As I say, the bad guys are always the most fun acting wise to play. Unfortunately, the financial security of playing a bad guy is very low because you will be killed at some point.
Yeah, well,
And so,
Designated Survivor is the perfect example. And I remember watching you on that show
right.
and becoming incredibly frustrated with your character because, but that's just a testimony to how good you played it.
Mhm.
Another show that was really good that came to a stop and then switched over to Netflix, and then
Right.
Netflix did what they could with it, and then, you know, that's just the fate of those types of shows. You just don't
Sure.
know. And I understand it changed showrunners a few times, and then Kiefer did really his best. We were talking to Paula Costanzo, who was on that show, and
Yeah.
how he really tried his best to like keep that show going.
Hmm.
It's a challenge, right? But that's the fun of what you do. You just don't
Yeah.
know what's around the corner.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's crazy. Well, I want to ask you really quick. You mentioned that
Hmm.
your wife is an actor,
Yeah.
very notably in her own right. So let me ask you, when you are auditioning and doing things, are you running lines with each other? Are you doing helping each other tape auditions? Like, because you both stay incredibly busy.
Yeah, no, I'm really lucky. So my wife named Marnie McPhail Diamond. She used to be Marnie McPhail, and she added hyphenated the Diamond, which I'm very honored. So she had an amazing career. She started on a show called the Edison Twins back in the 80s, one of the first Disney Channel shows here in Toronto. She grew up in Toronto. And we met on a movie 22 years ago in the Paris of the Prairies, in Winnipeg, Manitoba, on a TV movie. And we've been together ever since. And then she retired for about 14 years after our daughter was born. And at a certain point, she was sort of ready to get back into it. And she was amazing. She had an incredible career up here, and she's infinitely more talented than I am. And we moved back here to Toronto, and a big casting director here was like, I hear you're back, Marnie. And she's like, yeah, will you put yourself on tape for this something? And she did. Of course, she got it. And then she got her an agent. She's got the most incredible agent, and her career's back. She's come out of retirement. Her career's back better than ever before. She's just in a Dream Scenario right now with Nick Cage, and she's just finished the new M. Night Shyamalan movie. In fact,
Wow.
The last job the series I did before the strike was the new Orphan Black show,
Yes.
Orphan Black Echoes, and of course she was already on three other shows, and she had to get a part on my show. So it's which is great. So we got an amazing photo of the two of us in her trailer, and it was the first time we'd been on the same show together in 22 years. But yes, we it is so great to both. It's always been great. I mean, she's the most amazing person in the world, and she's an incredible actor. But it's great to have two actors in the family, especially now that we've gone. You just mentioned self tapes, so everything's a self tape. So I get to work with my favorite actor, and we get to play with each other. Whoever's filming who and whoever's on camera, so we can improvise and we can keep it fresh. And also, she will be unsparing in her critique of my performance. But we know we know what each other is capable of. So we're just going like, just more Marnie, or she'll be like, more Reed. You just need a little more Reed. And, we get there. So it's a delight. It's really fun. And it's great to talk shop because what I love about this job, I always say, I was talking to an actor I was just working with last week, and I say, you don't need crosswords to stave off dementia when you're an actor because you're problem solving every day, and every day is a new day. There's a new challenge, so you're using so many different parts of your brain and personality just to get through. I mean, I always call it work. I call it 1,000 first days of school, and and so often, gosh, with what we do, your first day may be your only day, or it's your biggest day, right? You've just got all your scenes in that day, and you've got to meet new people and create a character,
Wow.
and so it 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 definitely keeps you challenged. It keeps you agile and facile, and it's the greatest. I remember. I can't tell if I fated myself to become a working actor, but I just remember in 10th grade, I'm backstage doing this play, Jean Giraudoux Electra at school. And I go, all I want to do is be a working actor and work for the rest of my life. And it's happened. I've been a working actor almost since then. And
Wow.
yeah, it's great. It's an amazing life. You meet amazing people. You and I get to talk. I mean, there's so many people. It's very cool, fun people, and it's an adventure every day. And you get to be a kid. I got to work just now with one of my idols, Keith Carradine,
Oh,
and we
wow.
just right, and we're just sitting there, and he gets it. We have a very similar take on all of this, and we're just like, are we lucky? Isn't this great? He's like, we don't have to grow up, and we get to. I mean, we got bills to pay, but you're for your job, you're playing pretend and dressing up, and it's so much fun.
Yeah, well, as I said at the beginning, I've been a fan. I loved watching you. I mean, so many different projects.
Thanks, Brett.
One last question,
Yeah,
100%.
man.
I was like, man, I need
Yeah,
to get him on my
yeah.
show. So, out of all the characters you played, is there one in particular where you have perhaps learned something different about yourself that you didn't know, or maybe a character that has brought something out of you, whether it's the positive or it could be the negative, but I think it's all an encompassing learning experience with all the different people that you get to play.
Hmm. Well, I'll even take that to another place. What's so fascinating about this is you don't know what world you're going to inhabit and you're going to learn about. I didn't know that I would know everything about B-17 bombers, but then I suddenly am a B-17 bomber pilot. And I know everything about B-17 bombers, and that's the fun, especially as like a sort of autodidactic dude who loves to learn new stuff all the time. It's great to be forced into a world where like I'm just going to learn about that world. And so, like I said, I prepared for years to be about a cop. And back that was only books. I just read every book on cops that had existed about New York cops and Chicago cops and Boston cops. And I always love when it takes you somewhere strange that you didn't. I'm trying to think of like I've learned about the Ironside ships in the Civil War because I did that. You're learning about or a scientific subject that you never would have learned about because I always want to look if you're playing a doctor and you have to say all that jargon. I want to learn what it really is all about. So it's it's an honor. That was a thing. I remember being a little kid and I go, oh, I don't think I can pick one job. And I luckily chose a profession where I can play all the jobs and just never know what they're going to be. I'm like, God, the skills that I learned how to ride a horse for a movie. I learned how to scythe grass. I mean, just silly things that you would never have added to your lexicon, to your skill set. But so it's an incredible life with incredible people.
Yes. Well, Orphan Black, which is now
Hmm.
available to watch, of
Yeah.
course. And then of you can't beat 24. I mean, such an
No.
iconic series. You know, all of the shows that you've been a part of, and of course now uh your new project that you're working on, which we can't talk about much of, but we look forward to seeing Criminal Intent. That's just such a great show. Did I get that title right? Law and Order, yes.
This the one I just did is Law and Order Organized Crime.
Organized
Uh,
crime. Yeah, there's
and
so many. Okay, organized crime.
and then I'm very finally, because everything got delayed because of the strike, but Orphan Black Echoes is coming out in June on AMC. So that's going to be, I'm excited for that show. That's probably my most fun character in decades. So I'm really looking forward to that show.
I love it. Reed, thank you so much, man. It's been a
Brett,
pleasure
thanks,
chatting with
man.
you.
My pleasure. Thanks, buddy.
Absolutely.